Welcome to the latest addition to the Compliance Podcast Network, the podcast 10 for 10, which brings you the week's top 10 compliance stories curated together in one podcast each week. Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, brings you the compliance professional stories you need to be aware of at the end of your busy week. Sit back and in 10 minutes, hear about the stories every compliance professional should be aware of. Every Saturday, 10 for 10 highlights the most important news, insights, and analysis for the compliance professional, all curated by the voice of compliance, Tom Fox. Get your weekly filling of compliance stories with 10 for 10. Hosted by Tom Fox. 10 for 10 is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. Also, if you are looking for something new and different for the upcoming Compliance Week celebration in November, check out The Compliance Kids. It's my 3-book children's series on compliance and compliance professionals for children. But they make great gifts and great training tools for your employees. You can check it out on Amazon.com. We've linked to it in the show notes. First, a word from the sponsor of the Compliance Podcast Network for this month, Ethico.
If you're a compliance officer, middle managers are crucial in getting your programs from you to your frontline employees. But how do we activate those managers and get them on our side? Ethico's new Middle Manager Toolkit equips you with the skills needed to empower your managers, to promote a culture where ethical behavior thrives and employees feel empowered to speak up. Learn how to turn frontline managers into ethical leaders with our new white paper, Empowering Middle Managers as Ethics Champions. And did I mention you can get the whole toolkit for free? Head to ethico.com to download the full toolkit today.
10 for 10 for the week ending October 19, 2024. First up from the Wall Street Journal, RTX has agreed to pay more than $950 million in penalties to settle charges of FCPA violations by bribery in Qatar and contract fraud charges where Raytheon, the company formerly known as Raytheon, defrauded the federal government. So a very sad day for Raytheon, obviously one of the nation's top defense contractors, and now they're paying nearly $1 billion to settle multiple claims. Next up, from Reuters, McKinsey, the well-known consulting firm, is close to settling with the Department of Justice over its long-standing investigations into McKinsey's work to help boost opioid sales. It looks like or appears to be in the $500 million range. McKinsey has denied they did anything wrong, but of course they didn't. So we'll have to see how that one shakes out. Next up from Law 360, there was a hearing on October 11th in the Boeing plea agreement case. And at that hearing, the victims of the families objected to the deal between the Department of Justice and Boeing. The court had follow-up questions around some interesting topics, including the DEI requirement that the DOJ says is in place for the monitor selection, and how the corporate compliance monitor, who is there to improve safety at Boeing, will fit into the fraud that Boeing engaged in with the U.S. government. So the DOJ is really trying to put a very square peg in a round hole here, and the court wants to know how they're going to make it work. And the real problem, of course, is Boeing's culture. Kenya impeached its deputy president this week for bribery and corruption, a rare win in Africa for holding government officials accountable for engaging in bribery and corruption. And finally, Meta has fired multiple staff members, or at least 24, who abused their $25 meal credit. Some of these people made $400,000 and more in salary, so you wonder why they were cheating on their expenses. Meta, not known for its well-known compliance, is towed the line on these people. Does this have anything to do with layoffs? Not according to Meta. Next up, a story in law.com, and a piece clearly written from the perspective of the former general counsel at Cognizant Technologies, who at some point this century will be on trial for alleged bribery and corruption in India, says that general counsels and in-house legal providers are at risk because they often make decisions quickly and without full information. Well, whose fault is that? I know the business wants to go fast, but if you're dealing with a high-risk jurisdiction, you better dot your I's and cross your T's. Next up, from the Wall Street Journal, Risk and Compliance Journal, Dave Michaels reporting that Grewal, the now former director of enforcement at the Securities and Exchange Commission, has moved on to Wall Street. He has joined Milbank Rose in their litigation department, as he will have to lay off for a year, basically, and can't practice in front of the SEC, so expect to see him on the speaker circuit. If you get the chance, I would suggest you try and go see him. But yet another Wall Street regulator moving to Wall Street to deal with the regulators. So a very interesting move and not unexpected, however. Next up, from EuroNews, which European country is the most corrupt? The Hungarian prime minister has been accused of turning Hungary into the most corrupt. I don't think there's really any debate about that, but there are other countries in Europe who also vie for this honor. Bulgaria, Romania. Hungary is 76 out of 180 countries on the TI-CPI. We had another FCPA settlement this week, much smaller in amount, with Moog Technologies, a aerospace and defense manufacturer, has agreed to pay $1.7 million to settle allegations that its India subsidiary bribed officials to secure contracts with the Indian government and to eliminate competitors from the bidding process. The penalty is $1.1 million plus $600,000 of profit disgorgement. It's hard to understand how in 2022 that companies are still engaging in bribery and corruption with the same countries and the same industries with the same bribery schemes. Well, here we are once again with another corruption case in India, which seems to be moving higher and higher on the list of corrupt companies. So if you're doing business in India, you might want to pressure test to see if there's anything askance going forward with your compliance program. And then TD Bank continues to be in the news. I've blogged about this every day this week, so if you haven't had the chance to read much about the TD Bank $3 billion AML settlement, you can check out my blog post series on the FCPA Compliance and Ethics blog. But the Globe and Mail in Canada wrote just an excoriating piece about how Canada's reputation for clean banking and clean banking regulation literally evaporated in 40 minutes. And that 40 minutes was when Merrick Garland announced the massive settlement with TD Bank. And the article eviscerated Canada and its regulators for allowing this to go on their watch and do nothing about it. No enforcement action, no anything. All of this that was engaged on in the United States, of course, was reported directly up to Canada, and so they were well aware of this. So the Globe and Mail excoriates TD Bank, the parent company. 10 for 10 is a special production of the award-winning Compliance Podcast Network. As I mentioned at the start of this podcast, our network sponsor is Ethico, and they've got a great new service offering for you, a middle manager's toolkit. We've linked to it in the show notes, and it's available to you at no cost. Many companies struggle with getting information to middle managers, which allows them to be the first line of response in a speak-up culture, and Ethisphere has answered this challenge by putting together a middle manager's toolkit. Check it out in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of 10 for 10. I hope you'll check out the newest podcast in the Compliance Podcast Network, the Compliance Tip of the Day. In Compliance Tip of the Day, I give a 5 to 8 minute summary of one tip that you can integrate into your compliance program or put together for greater compliance program efficiency.